welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
And this is the podcast where every week we take all of the internet's wrestling content, dump it in the randomizer, we fire it up, and it randomly chooses a show for us to watch. And a lot of the times it's a show we would have never picked. Maybe we enjoy it, maybe we don't. And if you listened to last week's episode, we didn't enjoy the show, but it made for a super fun podcast. So if you didn't listen to the ECW December to Dismember show, which is last week's episode, if you're listening in linear fashion, go back and give that one a listen. Bad shows sometimes make for really fun podcasts, and that was the case.
They do. The only disappointing thing is that we didn't turn that into a two-part episode.
One was enough.
I would have loved to see the difference between part one and part two in terms of listenership. I know that's one of your favorite things to track for those few double episodes that we have.
And we sometimes the randomizer, I like to say it giveth and it taketh away. And it gave us an episode of NWA World Championship Wrestling this week, June 27th. 1987, Season 3, Episode 25, if you're on the Peacock streaming service looking at it.
It's funny because that almost lines up. You get another about 10 episodes deep of Season 3 of this podcast. We could have had some major synergy and symmetry between Wrestling at Random and the Peacock streaming service.
You can go back into our archives and find another episode we reviewed of World Championship Wrestling. I believe maybe 89, sometime in 89 was 1989.
It was early 89. It was pre the awesome part of 1989. This was pre JTEX Corporation, pre Great Muta and Terry Funk running roughshod, feuding with Ric Flair and Sting and all of that. This was early 1989.
So this is not our first trip to review World Championship Wrestling, but man, every time we get to take the trip, I'm up for it. I'm here for it. It's always a good time. And good news for us, this was a 2-hour episode. It wasn't there
was no Braves game.
We will find
out during this show that we watched that the following night, the Sunday edition of NWA World Championship Wrestling was preempted due to the Braves, but here on Saturday night, we got the full 2-hour episode.
Yeah, so we've got 2 hours, and the show starts with... So a little before we jump into the show, I guess I should tell you a little bit about the history of this show. This show, we go into go back to that episode in Season 2 of this podcast. We go into all of the details of the history of this program and
also
on TBS.
By the way, go back and check out the Season 2 episode of WCW Saturday Night that we reviewed.
Correct.
Which also goes into the later incarnation of the Saturday evening 5:05 time slot on TBS. I will just say before we get into the show proper, I was very happy when the randomizer pulled this show because Saturday nights on TBS is real comfort food wrestling for me. As far as wrestling television goes, this just in terms of washing out the taste of last week's show, having something that, while I don't have vivid memories of this episode, I guarantee you that I watched it because I watched this every Saturday night as a kid. This would have been right around about a year and a half or so after we moved back from New Orleans to the Chicago area. And so this was the wrestling I was watching as a kid after I no longer had access to World Class or Mid-South became UWF. Didn't get that here. NWA World Championship Wrestling was what I watched.
Yeah, and this was Georgia Championship Wrestling flowing in to be World Championship Wrestling from the NWA Jim Crockett Promotions. Would eventually be bought by Ted Turner and become WCW, the Saturday Night Show that we reviewed, and would be around for many years until its prominence was replaced by Monday Night Nitro in the 90s. But again, all the details on that history back in our back catalog here, our previous episodes reviewing World Championship Wrestling and WCW Saturday Night. So this episode opens up with Barry Switzer telling us about the Great American Bash. Did you know who Barry Switzer was, Adam?
The only reason I think I know who he is because I remember Jim Ross talking about him all the time. Like he's an old school college football coach, right?
Yes, and I bet if Jim Ross is talking about him, you know who he was, which university he was the coach of. The Oklahoma Boomer Sooners, of course.
Yes, I would imagine that would be the case.
He was in 1987, at the time of the show, he was the head coach of the University of Oklahoma. He would also become really well known in 1995 when he was the head coach of the Super Bowl champion winning Dallas Cowboys. So after Barry Switzer tells us that the Great American Bash is coming this summer, we get the intro reminding us this is all sanctioned by the NWA, and then we cut to the stage in the studio where David Crockett and Tony Schiavone welcome us. Talk about some comfort food. Here you go.
David Crockett and Tony Schiavone are the hosts, the play-by-play and colormen here for World Championship Wrestling in the WTBS studios. That classic backdrop, that classic background. I think, didn't you get a picture at a convention a couple of years ago with a couple of the horsemen up against that backdrop?
JJ Dillon, and Tully Blanchard, and getting to hold one of the actual NWA tag team titles in for a photo at the StarCast back.
I think that makes you one
All Out. Yeah.
That makes you one half of FTR. Everything that you just said.
Yes, pretty much. That's what me and FTR, we've got. You want to talk about synergies? Yeah, we've got a lot there.
If they go for those 6-man tag team titles in the NWA that we see referenced briefly here, you could be the third man.
Oh, the World 6-man tag titles at this point in time. Oh, just they would show up every once in a while, and you'd be like, "That's the 6-man team," and it always felt like Dusty Rhodes was a member of whoever the 6-man tag was. It was like the Road Warriors and Dusty Rhodes. They basically
have the same level of prominence or frequency in terms of appearing on the show as the NWA World Junior Heavyweight title or the Western States Heritage Belt.
So here we've got David Crockett, Tony Schiavone, and his mustache telling us that the Great American Bash kicks off on Wednesday. And this is when the Great American Bash wasn't just one show. It was like the summer tour coming to a town near you.
It was the Great American Bash. In later years, they would have the Bash, and then the end of the summer tour would be the Super Summer Sizzler Tour. That did not take off quite to the level that the Great American Bash did. But yes, the entire month of July into early August would be the Great American Bash. It begins this Wednesday in Lakeland, Florida. And we find out pretty early on in this show that unlike most episodes of World Championship Wrestling, of NWA World Championship Wrestling, we're actually going to have a really big marquee match, a tag team match here within these 2 hours of television.
So much so that I didn't think that this match was happening on this show. The way that they were talking about it, because they were trying to cram in 1,000 plugs every time they could. And so I thought that this was going to be one of these upcoming Omni shows that we never get to see that always sound awesome.
Yeah.
And they were basically like the dream team of Ric Flair and Lex Luger taking on brothers Jimmy Garvin and rugged Ronnie Garvin, who last I heard about Jimmy Garvin and Ronnie Garvin was Pro Wrestling This Week.
Yes.
Back 2 episodes in our archives, Bill Apter ranting and raving in his PWI segment about how Jimmy Garvin and Ron Garvin either got to feud or team up. They got to acknowledge their brothers. Here we are, like a year later.
That was 1986, and so apparently Bill Apter got through to them, and we got a result that I didn't expect. I sure thought it was going to be them feuding. Instead, here it is them teaming together, and we'll get to it later. But my God, have you ever seen 2 legitimate brothers look less related than these 2 guys? It's like their lives took divergent paths in every conceivable way when you see the presentation and the physical manifestation of these 2 human beings next to each other.
If you put Edge and Christian next to each other, and you put Jimmy Garvin and Ronnie Garvin next to each other and said, one of these teams are actually brothers, and the other are not actually brothers, a lot of folks would pick Edge and Christian as the legit shoot brothers here.
I think even more than that, if you put Jimmy Garvin and Ronnie Garvin next to each other, and you put Lance and Kerry Von Erich next to each other, I think people would still think Lance and Kerry Von Erich were the legitimate brothers and not Jimmy and Ronnie Garvin here. So we'll get to that. First, though, because that's not enough, that we have that big match, which at least I think we were both assuming would be the main event of the show. Not only do we have that right here at the beginning of the show, who's at the studio desk with Tony Schiavone and David Crockett? Ric Flair.
The world's heavyweight wrestling champion. Ric Flair, he comes in, and nobody's better at hitting all of their dates. Where they're going to be, who they're fighting, and why you should care than Ric Flair in the mid to late 80s here. This guy comes in talking about Wargames. He's talking about the match Beyond on the 4th of July in Atlanta. He's talking about this match taking on the Garvins.
He's talking about how great Jim Crockett Promotions is.
It's awesome. He's talking about the Great American Bash. He's talking about all the challengers. This was an awesome promo. Shocking. I'm glad everyone's sitting down to hear Ric Flair did an awesome promo.
It was also a great promo, but there were a couple things in here that made me laugh. One, not the promo itself, but while he's talking, they flash to the studio crowd, and there's like a group of 5 people that are holding this dot matrix printer paper 4 Horsemen sign that takes me back to my early days in grade school and printing stuff out on that wacky paper. And then he keeps saying throughout this promo how he will beat qualified opponents. First, he describes the Wargames as the greatest contest between qualified opponents. And then he says that he makes more money in 1 month beating qualified opponents than all of us will in our entire lives combined.
Yes, he's going to make more in July beating qualified opponents than you'll make in 25 years. I was howling with laughter. This is great. So he's not just beating geeks here. He's beating qualified opponents.
Which is a necessary statement because if you watch this show regularly, World Championship Wrestling on TBS, there are not many qualified opponents to be found. So you do need to tell viewers that there are qualified opponents out there and you are in fact beating them.
Yeah, no, the framework of this show is squash matches and promos.
Yes, squash matches and promos to get you hyped for matches that are either you're told they're going to be at the Omni or they're vaguely described and you assume they're coming whenever the NWA is coming to your town.
Yeah, and occasionally you get an angle.
Yes.
Or you get a competitive match. You
get a competitive match, or you'll get highlights of the competitive match or matches that took place that week on Worldwide.
Exactly. You'll get clips of some competitive matches somewhere from an arena.
Just as a description or as sort of a comparison, 1987 Worldwide, which actually was a match and a show that we reviewed on the very first episode of the bonus content on Patreon or Apple Podcasts, the main event of that show was Ric Flair versus Barry Windham in a world title match. So that's the level of stuff you sometimes got on Worldwide, whereas here, this tag match that we're going to see later is really the absolute high level of what you'd see on this show, and most often you don't even get that.
No, and we did not get the high level here. We got the lowest of the lows as we go to the ring. We've got the Mod Squad taking on El Negro and Alan Martin.
Alan Martin. And this crowd here, the studio crowd, they were fired up for this show because we've got El Negro and Alan Martin. He is in blue long tights. He's holding on to a terrible armbar after a terrible arm drag. And this crowd, full-throated, is screaming, "Go, or let's go, Alan, let's go," is the chant.
Quick fashion corner on the Mod Squad. Ugh. They have helmets, leather jackets, and aviator sunglasses.
There are 3 different gimmicks rolled into one that somehow feel like they still don't have any charisma. Like, they're basically the State Patrol before the State Patrol existed.
Yes.
Or they're State Patrol if State Patrol were motorcycle cops.
Motorcycle cops appears to be the gimmick. And so then I was like, well, what is Mod Squad?
It doesn't have anything. It doesn't.
And I was looking around. I can't tie why the motorcycle cops are the Mod Squad, but
yeah, apparently Dusty just thought it sounded cool. I can hear him saying Mod Squad, and there you go. It's Basher and Spike. They do not look like a Basher nor a Spike.
No.
They are no Spike Dudley. They are no Doug or Danny Basham. That's for sure.
After that terrible armbar you described, Basher starts his beatdown. Quick tags, and Basher does my favorite thing, though, where he throws the jobber into the jobber's own corner so that he can tag in his partner because he's bored beating up on the one guy.
We do see that later on in this show, and it is
it.
done by a exponentially better professional wrestler than whichever Mod Squad A or B did it here.
Yes, this was an inappropriate use of it because he was not putting on a sufficient of beatdown to warrant this type of attitude. We get a double back elbow by the Mod Squad, eye-gouging chokes. You'd think that they were transported out of late 70s WWF.
Yeah, if they would have told me these men were trained by Blackjack Lanza, I would have believed it 100%.
Oh, we got a chin lock by Spike, and then a slam. Basher with a top rope elbow where he does not jump at all off the top rope. Like, he comes off the top rope like he's at an indie with a tiny low ceiling.
He does. It feels like it was that IWA Mid-South show I was at in beautiful scenic Harvey, Illinois, where wrestlers were jumping off the top rope and knocking out the ceiling tiles as they did so. He seemed afraid to do that. That said, like, considering everything else we saw from the Mod Squad in this match, it was actually a pretty decent top rope elbow.
These guys were lame. This match was lame. We're not off to a good start.
It was guys who would be your upper tier jobbers beating lower tier jobbers.
Correct. Business picks up, though, when J.J. Dillon joins Tony Schiavone for an interview talking about the Wargames, the match beyond.
This is the most effective explanation of a complicated match without having on-screen graphics that I've heard in 35 plus years of watching pro wrestling. I understood everything about this, even though this was as if J.J. Dillon was giving the most detailed PowerPoint presentation on Wargames you've ever heard, but he did it in such a way that I was engaged the whole time. I understood everything.
Yep.
It made total sense.
He explained how the Wargames worked in a way that was so succinct, and he did a great job for a match that no one has ever seen at this point.
Yes.
This match has never happened before, and he did an awesome job explaining the rules of this match. They should just replay this clip anytime there's a Wargames match for JJ to explain it.
Absolutely, absolutely. He says at the end, after 21 minutes, all 10 men will be in, and the match beyond begins.
That's right. We don't get that designation enough. I do like that the Wargames is the match until everybody gets into the ring. The 5-minute intervals. But then once everybody is in the cages, then the match beyond starts, and you can only win by your opponent quitting.
Yes, the match beyond is the actual part of the match where a decision can be rendered.
Yes.
The Wargames is the part where you're just killing people. That's the distinction. He does a great job here with that. And I'm ready for Wargames. We should mention, by the way,
I legit was ready for Wargames by the end of the show.
You talk about Wargames and you talk about the Great American Bash Tour. We should note that not only was the tour going on for, a month, a little over a month, there were Wargames matches all across this tour. It's not as though the tour culminated with one show and then there was one Wargames. They were doing this in a bunch of cities. Dexter
Westcott versus
Derek
Arn
Westcott.
Henderson. Was it Derek? I had Dexter from the...
I had Derek, but either way, who knows? Either way, he sounds like a third line forward in the ECHL.
Yeah, Arn takes this guy down, starts working over the arm. Take a note, Mod Squad. This is how you do an entertaining beatdown. This was great.
My God. Yeah, the gap between Arn Anderson and either of the Mod Squad is Grand Canyon wide. Fashion corner, because we love doing that, particularly with the jobbers. Derek Westcott, a particularly pathetic-looking jobber, or Dexter Westcott. I don't think he's really earned, us getting his first name right. He has this incredible combination of sky blue singlet and then he's got yellow tights. His boots are all screwed up. He looks terrible. He's straight out of Central Casting.
Yeah, Arn's dropping knees and elbows to this guy's arm. He's doing like takedowns, and sometimes he'll just pull the hair for no reason other than he's a bad guy.
Yeah, because he's Arn Anderson.
Yeah, Arn slams him on top of his arm, like has it in hammerlock position and slammed on top of it. He snapmares the guy down, drops a knee to his face. Dexter then hits a few punches. Arn kicks him, gourd buster, which is his front suplex, and he gets the pin. This was a great Arn Anderson beatdown.
It was a great Arn Anderson beatdown. It was also a reintroduction into how uniquely and singularly weird of a play-by-play man David Crockett is. For one, like Tony Schiavone, it's kind of like he's doing his AEW Dynamite color commentary thing. He's much less experienced, so he really doesn't have much to add. But David Crockett has the weirdest pacing and speaking style and things that he gets excited about of any pro wrestling announcer I've ever heard. All of that is counteracted by how just incredibly enthusiastic he is and just the charm that gives. But my God, just the things that he starts screaming about out of nowhere, he gets so excited when Arn Anderson hooks Derek/Dexter Westcott in this front face lock, and he knows, because he's David Crockett, he's been there for a while, he knows what's coming next. He yells, here it comes, Tony! And the gourd buster happens. There are so many moments on this show, and I'll point some of them out throughout where he's quite the interesting character, that David Crockett.
David Crockett is great because Tony's doing the play-by-play and he's awesome, and then David Crockett gets so excited about stuff, and he's genuinely like loving everything he's saying, and he's so he adds a level of fun to what's going on. I like me some David Crockett.
The funny thing too is, and Tony is a much better professional broadcaster in 2022 as we record this than David Crockett was in 1987. But I talked about Tony Schiavone on AEW Dynamite, and really the role he plays on Dynamite is very similar to the role that David Crockett played.
Exactly the same.
On these old NWA shows, where it was just the guy that loved pro wrestling so much and was so excited about everything, and no matter how much he had seen, somehow maintains the capacity to be amazed and shocked by everything every single time.
Yeah, David Crockett or Tony Schiavone 2022 on Dynamite, they are the role of your buddy sitting next to you at the wrestling show, and when something happens and you turn to look at your buddy, and your buddy has their exact reaction every single time, and it's great.
He's the guy next to you who's elbowing you in the rib cage and say, "Did you see that? That was so cool."
Here it comes, here it comes.
Yeah, exactly. So we go from that. We go, as we said, from David Crockett being weird and fun to something much more weird and much less fun, I guess funny unintentionally. This Wargames promo, which starts off cool with like these welders
just
putting together
happening.
Yeah, there's welding happening. It's a cage that really isn't the same cage that you'd see in Wargames, but still they're putting it together. But then this human being, I'm assuming that's what it is, starts talking, doing a voiceover, and it is the strangest combination of accents I've ever heard in my life. It's like someone from the South trying to channel Game of Thrones in their mind and then it coming out of their mouth.
After commercial, Ric Flair and Lex Luger versus Jimmy Garvin with Precious and rugged Ronnie Garvin. I immediately stopped the show to say, wait, is this a 45-minute episode here? Because is there Braves baseball? Why is the main event on?
Is this a 45-minute episode? Is this a 90-minute time limit draw coming up here? What is this? I had the same reaction. And then the reaction I had, which goes back to something we said earlier in the show, seeing Jimmy Garvin next to rugged Ronnie Garvin. Jimmy out here with his ridiculous, huge, permed hair just bouncing and flowing through the air. And then you've got rugged Ronnie Garvin next to him, who's just, the hands of stone. He's got the crew cut, the blonde crew cut, just, looks like he's chiseled out of stone. And you could not have two more different demeanors from two human beings next to each other than these tag team partner brothers.
So I don't know if it's just my wrestling conditioning after watching wrestling for so many years, but I'm like, man, I really want to see this match, and it's going to be a real bummer that we're going to get screwed out of this match somehow.
Well, yeah, what I thought, I didn't think that once the match started this early on in the show, but what I thought when they first mentioned the match was going to happen, like, this is going to be what I remember so many times from watching wrestling TV as a kid, that they're going to have this match. It's going to start with 5 minutes left in the show. Tony Schiavone's going to be screaming, "Fans, we're out of time, we've got to go," and then we'll just never see the end of the match.
But no, we were treated to a heck of a TV match here. Ronnie, Garvin, and Flair start out by trading chops, and it is main event level Ronnie, Garvin, and Ric Flair here in front of 200 people.
At most.
Incredible.
Well, there's a lot of other things that happen in the match, but the story of this match is it starts with Ric Flair and Ronnie Garvin beating the absolute holy hell out of each other with chops. Knife-edge chops, obviously, from Ric Flair. Overhand chops, for the most part, from Ronnie Garvin. And then there's moments where the other two guys get in the ring. And then the whole time that happens, all you're doing is waiting for Ric Flair and Ronnie Garvin to get back in the ring together. And every single time that happens, it explodes into a chop battle again. It is something to see. And this crowd you mentioned, 200 people at most, they are hot for everything here on this show.
As they should be. This is, absolutely nuts watching Ronnie light him up with chops, hits a backdrop. Flair then catches him with an elbow and is able to tag in Lex Luger.
Well, and at this point, too, I can just imagine, like, if this was 10 years later, or even maybe 5 years later, like Kenta Kobashi just whispering in Ric Flair and Ronnie Garvin's ears and just saying, "Hey, guys, lighten up on those chops. You're going a little too hard."
Jimmy tags in as well. He works a headlock. Luger can't shove him off, keeps holding on to the headlock. Luger finally just throws Jimmy off. He tags Ron back in, and Flair's back in with him. And here we go again, trading shots. And Ronnie gets the best of him this time with chops and punches. We get a Flair flop. He even goes to the wrong corner, eats a punch from Jimmy. This is great stuff right here.
And the other thing that's great about this is that the referee, Scrappy McGowan, our guy, the favorite referee of Wrestling at Random, Scrappy McGowan here, calling it right down the middle.
Jimmy back in, chopping Flair, and this is the first time we see that those chops from Ron Garvin have busted open Flair's chest. He's bleeding from the chest. Flair's able to send Jimmy into the corner where Luger has his knee out. Luger now tags in. He goes to work. Flair back in.
You get a big "Go Jimmy Go" chant from the crowd, which isn't quite as sad as "Let's go Allen, let's go," but still, these people just they're out for everything.
Flair back in, hip toss countered into a backslide. We got a long 2 count.
The best part about this is after that long 2 count, David Crockett just says quietly, "That was 2.5."
And he tags Ron in. They chop the hell out of each other again, and Ron gets the better of the chop exchange again. So Ronnie Garvin is out chopping Ric Flair all throughout this match.
Which, if you watch it, is actually believable. There aren't too many people that you could say, I could see them out chopping, outclassing Ric Flair in the chops, but Ronnie Garvin is just not letting up, both in terms of the force of the chops and also the rapid-fire nature of them.
Flair hits a belly-to-back suplex. He's able to tag Luger back in. We get the power slam by Luger. And
David Crockett tells us it's the scoop slam power.
After the scoop slam power, Luger is given the sign for the torture rack. But Ronnie with punches and some biting.
Biting the nose.
Yeah, rams Flair and Luger together. We get suplexes. They suplex Flair in from the apron, and then we head to commercial.
We head to commercial with the great line from Tony Schiavone that I always love. He says, "The tape machines are rolling. We'll show you the finish on instant replay, or if the match doesn't end, we'll be back with you for the conclusion."
Luger with an armbar on Garvin as we're back from commercial. Tags Flair back in. Huge chops by Flair. Garvin's taking all kinds of shots in the corner.
And when you say Garvin, you're talking Ronnie, by the way.
Sorry, Ronnie Garvin taking shots in the corner from Flair. And then all of a sudden we get Ron Garvin face, where his
Yes.
eyes bulge out. He's had enough. He muscles Flair into the corner and starts beating the holy hell out of him. He just absolutely laying him in, sends Flair into the corner. He goes up and over and out to the floor.
Then they go out to the floor. Flair pulls, or they're wailing on each other. Then we get a head-first shot into the interview podium in the little studio backdrop area.
Yes, Flair into the podium where Tony and David are. Then they're back inside the ring. Jimmy tags in. We get 10 punch in the corner. Ronnie's back in for your favorite move, Adam.
Oh, this match was going so well up until this moment. So well. This would be like if Greg Valentine did a run-in for you. Instead, for me, this all grinds to a halt as in the middle of this fist fight, this war, Ron Garvin hits a top rope sunset flip.
He hits the top rope sunset flip. Luger makes the save.
Thank God. Lex Luger, new favorite wrestler. Ron Garvin, you are winning me over. You're back to the bottom of the list. Longtime listeners know. If you're a new listener, sorry to have to bring you up to speed. I hate the top rope sunset flip. One of the dumbest moves in the history of pro wrestling. You are jumping high into the air, taking a big back bump, something you can do power bombing yourself, and that somehow is supposed to lead to you pinning your opponent.
It's extra momentum coming off the top rope, right?
That extra momentum is energy transferred into your back, shoulders, and neck when you land. That doesn't then get like kinetically transferred into the legs of your opponent and allow you to take him down.
In September of this same 1987, that's the move that will win Ronnie Garvin the World Heavyweight Championship from Ric Flair just a few short months from now.
Yes, that is true. That's some foreshadowing. Trying to block that out. So it's really Ronnie Garvin's to blame for all these other wrestlers using the move. Because if you're going just, kayfabe wrestling is real, guys are watching that match thinking, well, I guess I've got to use
Bad's at home watching that match.
Yeah, young little B Bad watching that and seeing that happen, firing off his baby Bad Blaster. That almost worked. And then saying, yeah, that's going to be my finisher, and then went on to really ruin the next decade of wrestling. So thanks, Ronnie.
Here's where I make a note that David Crockett is just having the time of his life here.
I have that too. David is going crazy, all caps.
He's having so much fun, and so are we. Luger with shoulders into the corner on Jimmy. It looked like Luger was going to do a leapfrog here, but Jimmy was doing a backdrop.
This was one of those strangest things I've ever seen in a wrestling match in my life. Yes, one man went for a leapfrog. The other man assumed that he was to backdrop the man. And so just imagine those two things happening at the same time when those two men are Jimmy Garvin and Lex Luger. This is weird. This is preceded by one of your favorite things, and I say that tongue planted firmly in cheek. Lex Luger yelling while he throws punches.
I did not even make a note of that because I was blocking it out of my mind. It's better than 86 Luger yelling. This is less yelling, but still a lot of Luger yelling. Jimmy grabs a headlock and tags in Ronnie.
At this point, for no reason at all, David just screams, "Ugh!" I don't know what that was, because that could be understandable if it was Ronnie tagging in Jimmy.
Sure.
But what's the ugh about, David? It was just like he had so much excess energy from the previous exchange built up, and he just had to let it out, and that's how it sounded.
Flair is in with Ronnie. Goes right to the figure four. No messing around here. Flair's been getting his butt kicked with chops. He is not here to mess around. He literally just takes him down, slaps on the figure four. Yeah,
he hits the knee breaker straight into the figure four. Jimmy Garvin is in to make the save, and this is where Tony Schiavone casually tells us and indicates that there's one save rule.
Yeah. So Flair then throws Ronnie outside. Luger goes after him, sends him back in. Jimmy and Flair are in. We get a roll-up by Jimmy for 2. Luger gets a shot in from the outside. That allows him to tag in. Hits a backbreaker for 2 count. And
David Crockett did not approve of his pin, by the way, here.
No, and at this point, I'm like, wow, this match has been going for a while. And these guys are going at a heck of a pace for 1987.
The pace for this was nuts. For 1987, for the United States, for a studio TV show, you had the pace that Flair and Garvin set, that Flair and Ronnie Garvin said at the beginning of the match is carried throughout. Clearly Flair and Garvin are able to do that pace more than Luger and Jimmy Garvin, but still, like, even when those guys were in there, like, there really weren't a whole lot of rest holds, which is funny considering this match was, went a good 20 minutes. And then you have all these squash matches scattered throughout the show where large portions of those short matches are chin locks, headlocks, arm bars.
Yeah, this is just non-stop action.
It actually kind of reminded me of, we talked about on the Patreon/Apple Podcast bonus feed many, many months ago when we reviewed I think it was a mid-'80s All Japan match, which had a bunch of the guys you'd expect around that time in All Japan, Riki Choshu, Tenryu, and I had talked about how, like, that era in All Japan when Choshu came in, it was all about just crazy pace with the heavyweights. The matches didn't necessarily make a ton of sense or build, but it was just all about pushing the pace and going a million miles an hour. This honestly really felt like that.
Yeah, great comp. Yeah, they were just going, and I'm having a great time. Flair goes after Precious, and JJ outside the ring grabs Precious, the manager and wife of Jimmy Garvin, throws Precious over his shoulder, starts to leave the ringside area. With Precious over his shoulder, she's fighting, kicking and screaming, trying to get away from JJ. But Dusty Rhodes and Nikita Koloff come out to make the save for
the superpowers.
The superpowers.
It still is weird to, even though, like, I lived through that, it still is weird to see Dusty and Nikita out there together as friendly baby faces after their feud, and just how dastardly of a heel and hated of a heel Nikita Koloff was just a year or two prior. Obviously, the tragic car accident with Magnum TA, that kind of changed everything for the direction with Nikita Koloff.
So they come out, they save Precious in the ring while this is happening. Flair and Luger throw poor Scrappy McGowan, the referee, outside the ring.
Talk about a way to turn heel with me. My God, Scrappy. Don't do that to Scrappy.
Flair to the top rope. He's going to try to injure Jimmy's leg that's being held by Lex Luger, but Ronnie comes in, throws Flair off the top, punches Luger. Jimmy then grabs Flair and hits a brainbuster, which was his finisher.
A terrifying brainbuster here on Ric Flair in 1987.
We've got no referee. So Ronnie comes in. He makes the 3 count. Scrappy then gets back in the ring. He calls
Well, hold
for
on.
the bell.
We need to stop and back up here. Ric Flair allows, like, in real life, Ric Flair said this is an okay thing to do. Jimmy Garvin is going to get a legitimate visual pin on Ric Flair. Like, this isn't as though Ronnie Garvin made a real fast count.
No.
This was, if anything, a slow count. So if Ric Flair, for all of his other faults, maybe the least selfish main event wrestler, world champion ever.
Almost to a fault.
What he gave guys constantly, trying to make guys look good. But my God, Jimmy Garvin here getting a legit visual pin on Ric Flair, the world heavyweight champion, in 1987. Did not expect that. I probably should have, knowing Ric Flair, but still didn't expect that as we were watching this.
Scrappy calls for the bell. After commercial, we're told it's a double disqualification. Jimmy has something to say to Tony Schiavone.
What he has to say to Tony Schiavone is the word pally.
He goes,
only thing I care about in this promo is Jimmy Garvin tussling his hair and saying pally.
He wants Flair on the Bash Tour. He wants him in a cage. He says, "You won't abuse or try to steal my woman." He wants a cage to keep the Horsemen out, and he wants his revenge on Ric Flair. Freddie Smith is in the ring. He's taking on one half of the World Tag Team Champions, Ricky Morton of the Rock and Roll Express.
Best thing about this match, most important thing about this match, Scrappy McGowan is okay. He got a high five from Ricky Morton coming into the ring here. This was a weird squash match in that Ricky Morton is like the ultimate babyface, and he almost is like a heel here in this very short squash match with the rather gelatinous jobber Freddie Smith.
Freddie Smith, jobber fashion corner here. Terrible looking jobber.
Ugh.
This guy's fat, no tan. He's old, and he's got a mustache.
Basically, you just checked every box that makes for a great jobber.
It absolutely did. Oh, the only thing he was missing was, like, ill-fitting gear.
And a mask.
Yes, his gear fit. It looked too professional, but otherwise, him as a person looked absolutely should not be untrained and should not be in the ring here. And Ricky Morton comes out. You mentioned he is loved by the crowd. Ricky Morton, a very popular wrestler. Backbreaker, couple punches to the face. Ricky goes to the top rope, and he comes off with a shove? What was that?
It was like a jumping headbutt, I think. He jumped off the top rope and grabbed the man's head and gave him a headbutt. This was not on the list of things I thought we were going to see Ricky Morton do off the top rope here. That was not on the list. Instead, he hits a big knee lift, gets a drop kick, gets the win. My favorite part about this match is after Ricky Morton hits a move, David Crockett just says, Ricky comes up and Ricky comes down.
We see a graphic for the Four Horsemen, and we are joined by J.J. Dillon and Lex Luger.
Lex Luger, who is pacing around, still in his gear, but also wearing a white polo shirt. A look.
Where does Jimmy Garvin get off issuing challenges? JJ says. He goes, we can get Jim Crockett in the room and we can work something out. And then Luger's just yelling and ranting and raving.
Ripping his shirt off. He's screaming about the summer bashes, which are not a thing, but he's convinced they are. He did not get the memo about the Great American Bash. It's the summer bash. It's Luger yelling his way to an effective promo.
We are the best at wrestling, not what happens after the match. And then Luger pulls his shirt off, says they're coming after everyone. After commercial, Dusty Rhodes is with Tony Schiavone.
1/3 of the world's 6-man tag team champions, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Dusty talks about the match we saw.
He says he's so happy to see someone other than himself beat up the Horsemen. Then he says, 4 horsemen without a head. A headless horseman, if you know what I mean. Amazing.
Then he talks about Wargames. Then he talks about the Bash. So Dusty's doing the same journey that Flair was doing, putting over every match that's going on.
He also talks about reflecting at his cottage in Wyoming. He's reflecting upon filling stadiums while he's relaxing at his cottage in Wyoming.
He then talks about how Tully stole Dusty's $100,000. And then Dusty's talking about Dark Journey, and he talks about, he basically alludes to going to strip clubs in Atlanta. And then Dusty propositions Dark Journey, and then we go to the ring. For the United States champion, the other half of the superpowers to Dusty Rhodes, it's Nikita Koloff in the ring to take on Brody Chase.
The least Brody-looking wrestler in the history of wrestlers with the name Brody. This man, Brody Chase.
Yeah, he looked more like a Chase than he did a Brody.
First name Chase rather than first name Brody.
Brody with some offense on Nikita, and then he has had enough real quick, and Nikita spins him into the corner and then unleashes just a flurry of strikes, hits the Russian sickle clothesline, and it's over. Now, that is a squash. And I'm looking at you, Mod Squad. This is how you do a squash.
There are moments where you go back and watch Nikita Koloff, and he's like Goldberg before Goldberg. This is a squash match that's like that. Nikita Koloff was not a great wrestler, but he had such a great presence. I loved his like weird intensity in terms of how he did just simple things like punches and hip tosses. I enjoyed this.
Oh, and his facial expression when he's just like, all right, enough of this.
Yes.
I've had enough. Let's shut this down. I wasn't expecting you to try to have offense, Brody. I'm shutting it down. And it was great. Yeah, I highly enjoyed that. And then what I enjoyed less was Nikita Koloff coming over to cut a promo. I'm just going to include the audio.
The Wargames match beyond, a lot of that will be happening too.
You know what I'm tired of hearing about today? I'm tired of hearing the 4 horsemen come out there and say, you know, we are one team, and the Superpower and the Road Warrior are 2 teams. You see, we horsemen, we all think alike. We all chase women together. We all go to gym and train together. We go to bar and party together. We all think alike. Let me tell you something, four horsemen. The superpower. My superpower, Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, and our comrades, the Road Warriors. We all think alike too. We got many things we think alike. You see, we all know how to hurt people. And we all know how to cause a lot of pain. Je dois ta. 2 team enter, 1 team leave. 4 horsemen and a great American band at the Wargames. You are going to feel a lot of pain. And Lex Luger, no thing I'm not going to be looking for you.
You know what, Tony? Nikita told me one thing. Chitota means pain, blues, and agony for the 4 horsemen at the Great American Bash, baby.
Fans, let's go back to the room.
Well, the audio does not do justice to the visual of Dusty Rhodes standing in front of the camera almost the entire time that Nikita is cutting this promo.
We go back to the ring. It's Barry Windham in the ring to take on Gary Phelps.
Oh,
and
a
yes,
truly pathetic-looking jobber.
Gary is a great-looking jobber. He is doughy and he's pale. I love
Horrible mullet, blue singlet. I also wrote doughy build in my notes. That is, I could take a screenshot for you as we're recording if you don't believe me. But yes, Tony Schiavone says that Barry Windham is the hottest property in all of pro wrestling. David Crockett says longingly that Barry is long and lean. And we're on our way here. And again, if you've listened to our debut episode of the bonus content all the way back in that feed, you've heard us talk about Barry Windham in 1987 against Ric Flair and how great he was. Maybe the best wrestler in the United States at that point. This is just a squash match here, but you still can see some of what makes Barry Windham so great.
Yeah, Windham slams him. He goes and teases a leg drop, but then just kicks him in the head instead.
Yeah.
We get a great drop kick by Windham, which is always impressive for a dude that big.
This is where after Barry hits that drop kick, he then hits a knee. And then David Crockett says that Gary Phelps is a wet noodle.
Yes, he calls him a wet noodle. I loved it. We get a loud lariat chant from the crowd.
Well, also after that, so before we get the lariat in the match, though, after the wet noodle comment, Barry locks on a reverse chinlock, and David Crockett, the babyface play-by-play man, just yells with such joy and glee in his voice, "Make 'em suffer." David Crockett is so weird.
Windham, so this is weird as well. Windham is standing there in front of Phelps, and he touches Phelps' leg, and Phelps just falls to the ground. This was a minimum effort required takedown here.
Yes, but if you see the physiques and the wrestling ability of both men, this may be the most realistic thing that happened on this show.
No, the most realistic thing was this atomic drop, where Barry hits an atomic drop and almost murders this guy.
Yeah. Well, how about before that? So we've talked a little bit about the commentary on this show, but what we haven't said is how little they actually say. There are stretches in these matches while action is happening where neither man, David Crockett nor Tony Schiavone, will utter a word for more than a minute. This happens here where we go a good 60 seconds, nothing happening, neither announcer making a peep, and then randomly, for no reason, David Crockett just yells, "Oh yes!"
Yeah,
so weird.
After this atomic drop, both announcers were screaming, like, "Oh my gosh, thought he killed that guy." We get some huge chops. Windham then comes off the ropes, hits his big flying lariat.
No, before that, I can't believe you didn't notice this or you didn't write this down. So right before the lariat, that's the finish. Barry Windham hits a body slam, and then it's Tony Schiavone with the zinger here for once instead of David Crockett. It says Barry gets this body slam. Tony says, "Oh, the old sack of taters."
Yes.
Tony was... he still is Tony Schiavone, but this is Atlanta, Georgia, Tony Schiavone right now. This is deep in the heart of the South, Tony Schiavone. He is, it's funny here.
Yeah, that was hilarious. Tony then interviews Barry Windham after the match. He's ready for the bash. He wants the Horseman.
Not the most compelling promo from Barry Windham here. We then get a graphic. We had these like graphics every time we go to commercial break, or it'd be just like the little like inset box of some blurry action and a logo, and then like a weird one-line thing. And this one said, "Need a lift? You know where to find it." I don't know what that had to do with the show. It also wasn't about like roadside car service or anything.
No, it's like showing a clip from the Wyndham match that we just saw. Yeah.
I guess that may have been referencing the old sack of taters that Barry hit on whatever this guy's name was, Gary Phelps. Definitely not Michael Phelps, physique-wise. That is for sure. We go to commercial. We come back, and this is a match for the NWA Television Championship.
Wow, this is a big show. We had a main event caliber match earlier, and now we've got a TV title match.
We do, and I have questions because I want to know what Hal Moore could have possibly done to get a title shot. This is by far, as this match goes along, the most pathetic jobber we've seen yet on this show, and maybe in the history of this podcast. He's wearing black tights, a black tank top. The best way I can describe him is overstuffed Brock Anderson.
It's not a tank top. It's not
a singlet though.
It's not a singlet. It's like a spandex. It's a spandex tank top. Yeah.
It's a black singlet cut like a tank top. Again, this is like it's like buffet Brock Anderson. It's really, really weird. And the thing about this match, I would say more than any of the other.
Well, this guy is the definition. When you've used it before when we call this guy is a bag of milk. That's what this guy looks like.
Yes, he is built like a bag of milk, and he's about as trained as a bag of milk. He does not know how to do anything. He does not know how to take anything. And Tully Blanchard is just embarrassing this man. At what point he takes him down, he steps on the man's back and gives him an atomic wedgie.
He gave him a wedgie. That did happen.
There's another point where Tully Blanchard, the heel, gets up in the corner and does the 10 punches in the corner. Like, I've never seen a heel do that, especially like a heel's heel like Tully Blanchard. Tully hits a great drop kick, does a great Tully Blanchard prance. And again, this guy, Hal Moore, has no idea what to do. He gets back to his feet, and Tully puts his own hands behind his back, and dares this guy to try to punch him. He cannot get to him. Finally, after 3 or 4 attempts, Tully just kicks him in the stomach and absolutely ragdolls him into the ropes.
So Tully's got his hands behind his back, and every time Hal throws a punch, Tully's just like juking and moving out of the way. He's like not even
minimal effort moving out of the way, though. He takes like a half step back, and this guy cannot adjust his attack.
No, this was just pure incompetence. He kicked him, dropped a few elbows. He covers him, and Hal kicked out.
Oh, I was offended, and Tully was as well.
So Tully was very offended. We were both offended. We get loud, "We want Dusty" chants from the crowd. And then Tully muscles this bag of milk up for a slingshot suplex, floats over, and gets the pin. Tully, of course, is still your television champion.
Yes, and to reiterate, this guy, his build was somewhere between bag of milk and bag of sidewalk salt. He may have been so heavy that the sidewalk salt may be a better description. Either way, not exactly the ideal shape and size to have to do a slingshot suplex to, but Tully, the consummate professional, pulled it off.
We see more welding going on for the Wargames. We get the video again. Another Horseman graphic. This time it's Arn Anderson here for an interview.
Yes, Arn Anderson promo time. I am very happy about that. And talk about a fashion corner. Arn Anderson, shirtless, amazing sunglasses, gold chain, khaki pants, looking literally like only Arn Anderson can look.
These glasses looked like safety goggles. They were huge.
They looked like the sunglasses version of the glasses that I wore as a child that I'm sure had nothing to do with why I was bullied so much in school.
He's joined by JJ, Lex, Tully, and Dark Journey. He talks about the Wargames. He's talking about how Luger's going to win the U.S. title.
He's running down the rules of Wargames. It's a more intense version of what JJ did earlier. Very effective.
Yeah, he says Luger's going to win the U.S. title. Him and Tully they're looking at the Rock and Roll Express for the tag titles. This was just a great classic Arn Anderson promo.
Yes, this was Arn being Arn. It was fantastic. Again, we understand War Games. We know what the Horsemen are going to do here in the Great American Bash Tour, and we're ready for it. Then here comes Jim Cornette, and he's on fire, but there is a particular moment where I cannot believe what comes out of his mouth, and I will not repeat it. But even here in 1987, like I've never heard these. The only way you can describe them are racial slurs,
like Asian
racial slurs in 1987 on television.
There's no way that was okay in 87.
No,
there's no way.
We've reviewed shows from the 70s, from the early 80s, from the mid 80s, from the late 80s, all around this time period and before, and I've never heard anyone. And I'm only laughing because I'm just so exasperated that we actually heard this. I've never heard anyone say anything even close to what Jim Cornette says here in terms of describing where the Road Warriors have traveled and the nationalities of the wrestlers they've beaten.
He does come out with the United States Tag Team title belt.
Underrated, beautiful championship belts.
I love that belt. It is a great belt. It's got the red dyed leather. It's got USA painted in red, white, and blue on the front of the gold. It's a great looking belt.
But the USA, the red, white, and blue is understated. It's not these obnoxious modern U.S. championship belts.
Correct.
Particularly in some ways, it's actually very basic, smaller version of the IWGP US heavyweight title, which you, I believe, have actually held.
I have.
Not legally, but possession being 9/10 of the law.
It's been in my hand over my shoulder. Yes, I fondled that belt, if you will. I love this U.S. tag title belt. It's great. It captures my eye every time I see it. He runs down the Rock and Roll Express on behalf of the Midnight Express, and all the tag teams want the tag team championship. It's the most important thing, and the Midnight Express are in the ring. They are taking on Paul Damon and Terry Jones.
The only thing worse than Stan Lane's super kick in this match is that mustache and that dance. I guess I now know what the inspiration was for Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey in the Heavenly Bodies. He watched very early Stan Hansen. Stan Hansen. Jesus, that's a totally different conversation. That would be quite the thing. Stan Lane, when he first joined the Midnight Express and had this terrible mustache and the dance, and yeah, he's less hairy than Gigolo Jimmy Del Rey, yet somehow more disgusting here.
He's like trying to be a creepy version of the Fabulous Ones.
Yes, yes. He's succeeding. There's no trying. He is massively succeeding, overachieving in that effort.
Bobby Eaton throws Paul Damon outside. Stan pretends like he might catch him, but then moves away and misses. Back inside, Bobby tags in Stan. We get Stan Lane's martial arts spin kicks.
That is a generous description. Calling those martial arts spin kicks is like calling a knife edge chop a judo chop.
He throws him back outside, and Cornette is out there fanning this guy with the tennis racket. Bobby then brings him over to the stage.
This is great.
Cornette grabs the microphone. He yells, "Do you think the Rock and Roll Express can beat us? Say no." And then back in the ring, Terry Jones comes in. He gets more of a beatdown.
We should mention Terry Jones, physically, he looks like a geek version of Buddy Landell.
He does. He puts him in his corner to tag Damon back in. This is an appropriate use of throwing the jobber back into his own corner to tag. He slams Damon, and then Bobby goes to the top, hits the Alabama Jam, his top rope leg drop.
Beautiful Alabama Jam. I feel like we've seen Bobby Eaton several times here on this podcast, so we've gotten screwed out of the Alabama Jam. We end up seeing a top rope elbow or a top rope knee drop, which are also very well executed by Bobby Eaton, but the Alabama Jam is it's perfection.
Stan comes in, they do a double team flapjack and get the victory.
They go to commercial while Jim Cornette is still just ranting and raving. Like it's just a hard cut as he's screaming, which is probably for the best.
Ricky Morton is out there with Tony. He accepts the challenge of the Midnight Express.
This promo is it's almost like you're watching and hearing cocaine. And I'm not saying Ricky Morton was on it. I'm not making that accusation, but that's just what this felt like. He has some bizarre line that I don't fully understand where he says, and this is a direct quote, talking about Jim Cornette, "Did your mom have any kids who lived?"
Yeah. I
rewound that multiple times to make sure I had taken my notes correctly. I did the same
thing because I'm like, okay, I didn't get it.
No, he says brother a lot. Ain't nothing like the solid gold of rock and roll. He kind of struggles to land the plane here on this promo, but then leaves. One of my favorite things about World Championship Wrestling, the TV show during this time period, is that you would often have these terrible promos that were highly entertaining for the wrong reason. And then no matter what, Tony Schiavone would always have the exact same rap and go to commercial. Always crack me up.
After commercial, we've got Daryl Dalton versus Thunderfoot number 2. I'm like, we're going to get a jobber match.
It's jobber versus jobber. This is maybe if you're talking about imaginary pro wrestling rankings on any TV show that we've watched, this has to be the 2 lowest rated wrestlers matched up against each other that we've ever seen. The only thing I can compare this to is years later on WCW Saturday Night, they would have like the underdog challenge, and it would be like Kent Cole against Frankie Lancaster. It'd be like each of their opportunities to actually get a win for once. That's what this was like, but somehow worse.
Yeah, they start to grapple kinda, and then I'm bored, so I looked up Thunderfoot 2, and his name is Gene Ligon. So that wasn't helpful. I have no clue who that is.
Gene Ligon, yeah.
And so we keep watching. We get
Wait, his partner, the other Thunderfoot, was the Outlaw Joel Deaton.
Yes, I knew the other Thunderfoot, but Thunderfoot number 2, I don't know this guy at all.
Because I remember Joel Deaton from the magazines. People always talked about Joel Deaton, this guy Billy Black, who they said was like the American Jushin Liger. You'd always read him about the magazines, like he's this great high flyer. Then I remember years later going, seeing All Japan tapes, and Joel Deaton would be there, sort of like the cowboy job guy teaming with, the Stan Hansens of the world.
Jumping double knees, snap mare, and then he covers him, and Thunderfoot pulls this guy up at a 1 count.
The most important thing about this is that we go, I would say, a good 3-4 minutes into this match without David Crockett or Tony Schiavone acknowledging that it is taking place. They are talking about everything under the sun other than this match. They're talking about the Super Bowl show moving to Saturday mornings. The Braves are preempting tomorrow night's show. They're just talking about the Bash. They're literally naming every city. David Crockett spends a good 90 seconds rattling off every town in America within like driving distance of a Great American Bash Tour show.
He dumps Dalton outside. At this point, I noticed Dalton has a pretty gross-looking rat tail in his hair.
He does.
Sting, he is not.
No.
Chop to the throat. Thunderfoot picks this guy up again at 2. And at this point, I'm like, is Thunderfoot not a jobber? He took the entire match. He's got the entire match.
David Crockett says, while this action, if you can call it that, is taking place, he says, as you can see, fans, the wrestlers are getting primed. Incorrect.
No.
How about the chant here? David, he just keeps spouting cliches, and then the crowd is chanting, egg-sucking dog. Amazing.
He picks this guy up again. I'm like, come on. Finally hits a swinging neck breaker for the win. This match sucked, but somehow both these guys still better than the Mod Squad.
Yes. We're back. No. We saw the Mod Squad in action. Now it's time to hear from Spike and Basher.
Yeah. My notes say, "Oh no, I just wrote that line about the Mod Squad," and then here they are. Mod Squad's here doing a promo, and they want the Rock and Roll Express. Doubt it. And then Spike goes, "Tell him, Bash." Ugh, it's horrible. But thank goodness, J.J. Dillon and Jim Crockett, president of Jim Crockett Promotions, are out. Garvin was making demands, championship on the line in a cage, willing to pay any price for this, and that got JJ's attention. JJ says that they want Jimmy to put the fur coat on the line,
which is apparently Ric Flair's fur coat that
he
Jimmy
bought it
Garvin
for Precious. He was going to give it to Precious, and Jimmy Garvin stole it. And then he wants a one-night dream date with Precious on the line as well. Jim Crockett says that Jimmy Garvin has agreed to all of these terms and makes it official.
Yeah, he says Garvin he's so confident in his abilities to pin Ric Flair again that he is willing to put up his fur coat and his woman.
This was the setup for one of the most famous angles in the NWA history with the dream date with Precious and Ric Flair. That's a very memorable and legendary angle. And this was the build for that. So this set up that match that led to that angle. So
what this also set up is a replay of the closing moments, and by that I mean the last 5 minutes of the match that we saw earlier with Ric Flair and Lex Luger taking on Ronnie and Jimmy Garvin. You notice how I don't say the Garvin brothers? Like, no one says the Garvin brothers when they talk about them as a team. It's not the Steiner brothers or any of these other brother teams because they don't seem like they're brothers. It just doesn't feel right to say it.
After the highlights of the tag match, we get Tully and Dark Journey out there with Tony. He talks about the $100,000 match with Dusty. And then the show goes off the air. And that's the end.
My favorite thing about this Tully promo is his nicknames for people. Dark Journey is DJ. Dusty is Big Dust. And it's one of those two where it's whenever you see Tully Blanchard cutting promos during this time period, my takeaway from it is always, if this was an era, if this was a world, if this was a timeline where Ric Flair didn't exist, Tully would be the lead heel in every company that he was in. But he was almost always in the same company as Ric Flair, so he was never the lead guy.
So underrated as a promo, Tully Blanchard.
As a promo, as just a face that you want to punch, everything.
Yeah. I mean, as a child watching this, Tully was a zero for me, right? Like,
really?
As a promo guy, I never thought of him as a promo guy, right? Because I thought of Flair and Anderson as like the guy is doing the talking. Tully, I never thought of as like really doing the talking, and then I watch it through the eyes of today, and I'm like, man, yeah, Tully shouldn't be third on this list. But that's who he was rolling with at the time. That's how good the Horsemen were at talking. That at any other place, Tully would be like one of the best talkers around. Just absolutely awesome.
Well, think about a lot of the WWF shows that we've watched from around this time period. You dropped Tully into there, and yeah, you had Piper. It was, an incredible promo. I'm not saying that Tully was at that level, but you get him anywhere away from Ric Flair, and he's going to stand out so much more.
Favorite thing on the show?
It's hard to not say Ric Flair and Ronnie Garvin beating the hell out of each other, because that was the best thing on this show.
That is the right answer.
I would say outside of that, maybe my favorite thing and the most effective person on this show was James J. Dillon. Between his explanation of Wargames at the beginning and then him with Jim Crockett out there at the end of the show, running through the stipulations and what was going to happen with Flair and Jimmy Garvin, just fantastic. He's another one of those guys that as a kid I didn't think much of, like as a really little kid, and then as I got older, and then obviously watching these shows too, you definitely get an appreciation for prime J.J. Dillon.
You got older, but somehow J.J. Dillon stayed the same age.
100%. I mean, when he came out on Dynamite was it 2020 or 2021? It was like, it's still J.J. Dillon. I mean, when he was out there as the commissioner in WCW, or the head of the executive committee, whatever it was, he looked exactly the same as he did 10 years prior here managing the Horsemen.
When I met him at that StarCast that you talked about at the top of the show. Yeah, looked exactly like he did here. We talk about J.J. Dillon syndrome all the time, where you just look like an old guy at all times. And
he was the perfect manager for the Horsemen too, because the thing they didn't need, the thing that wouldn't have worked, is having another really over-the-top character, because you already have Ric Flair. Like if you put Jimmy Hart or you put Oliver Humperdinck or, some wacky Lou Albano. I'm just thinking of every crazy guy you could think of. It would have distracted. It wouldn't have worked. But J.J. Dillon, like you could believe, because he was serious, but he also had enough arrogance. You could believe that Ric Flair had sought J.J. Dillon out as the guy that, like, okay, J.J., your job is to keep all of us from killing each other. Keep us together. Come up with a plan. Like, it worked.
Worst thing on this show. We're in alignment on the best things.
Worst man.
Thing for you?
I mean, it's hard because the worst things amused me. As far as like the jobbers being so pathetic and inept, I would say
a great batch of jobbers this week.
Yeah, this rivals that Continental show from 1989 as just for pathetic jobbers. I would say undoubtedly for how great he was otherwise in his segments. The comments that Jim Cornette made that I referenced earlier were just jarring. Again, even watching it through 1987 eyes, much less 2022 eyes. Yikes.
Yeah, in-ring, it has to be either the Mod Squad's match or Daryl Dalton and Thunderfoot. Those two matches were horrible.
I would say the Mod Squad, because the Daryl Dalton Thunderfoot match only existed for Tony Schiavone and David
tell
Crockett
us about lineup changes.
For them to do the first ever podcast in recorded history. That's all that was. Whereas the Mod Squad were apparently supposed to be a push team. They got a promo later.
They challenged the Rock and Roll Express, the World Tag Team Champions. I was outraged. Yeah, so Mod Squad is terrible. So that is gonna wrap it up. This was this is a fun show. If I was watching this, like, I want to know everything that's going on at the Great American Bashes. I can't wait for this Wargames. Sounds incredible. That there's a lot of welding going on. I'm excited.
Yes. Welding and weird accents. What else can intrigue you more?
Yeah, I'm in on all this stuff, and I'm still pissed I can't get to the Omni. Those are all like so.
Yes.
Like all
can't
those
get to the Omni.
True.
Can't get to that stadium in Charlotte where they're going to have the barbed wire match between Dusty Rhodes and Tully Blanchard. So many shows we won't be able to see, but it made it a little bit easier here than it is going back and watching some of the other shows. Most of the shows that they would do from this time period, because we at least got that big tag team match with Flair and Luger against the Garvins.
That's right. This match. This show had it all. It had a competitive match. It's set up. It had a big angle.
It had a title match.
And we had a TV title match. No, this show had it all. I'm glad. This was a good one, Randomizer. You did us a solid after last week, so thank you.
Did us a solid, and I really think like this was very needed after ECW December to Dismember. We needed something that was not only fun but had like an air of childhood nostalgia and familiarity to it. I needed this. I needed an easy show that made me think of my childhood watching pro wrestling, and this did the trick for sure.
It did a great job, and if you want to interact with the show, please do it via Twitter at WrestleAtRandom. You can also do it on Instagram at WrestleAtRandom. DMs are wide open. You can send us an email if you're not on social media. That's wrestlingatrandom@gmail.com, facebook.com/wrestlingatrandom as well. If you aren't aware, we've got a Patreon. We have an Apple Podcast bonus content, and whatever paywall it might be behind right now, there's bonus content out there. You can go to wrestlingatrandom.com. You can get all the links to subscribe. If you're in Apple Podcasts, you just click the button. You subscribe right there. It's $5 a month. You unlock all this bonus content. If you go to patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom, you can access all of the bonus content as well. As soon as you sign up, you pay that $5, you unlock the entire back catalog. We're talking, at this point of the recording, 50 plus episodes. It's unbelievable how many hours of extra content that have not shown up here in the free feed is out there in the bonus content. Go hit it up right now. We also have a tier where you can be the randomizer. Have we not reviewed a show you'd love to have us watch? You can pay to have us watch that show, commission that podcast, $10 tier on the Patreon. Go check it out. We've got a few in the queue right now, so make sure you sign up, patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. After you request a show for that $10, then the next month you bump right back down to the $5 tier, continue to get all that bonus content every single week. And we've got shirts available as well, so you can check out all that information there. All the links I described are available. The entire back catalog of this podcast at wrestlingatrandom.com. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. If you can't support us through financial means, then please support us through your word of mouth. Tell your wrestling fan friends about us. Tell your friends that used to be wrestling fans about the show. We rely on you to continue to spread the word.
Yeah, and maybe even tell your brother about the show. Maybe you guys don't look alike at all. Maybe no one would think that you two are brothers. You can show everyone that you're related by listening to this podcast together. I guess? I don't know.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Randomizer. And thank you, David Crockett.
Always. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.